ripped apart by horses, torn apart by horses, surrounded by evil forces. Hundreds at the left, thousands at the right. How can you forget? Prophesy before your eyes, it would come to pass. It's said in Deuteronomy, obey all his commands, lest ye forget. Lest ye forget. Scattered abroad.
The date is August 21st, 1831, on a silent summer evening. Inspired by signs from God, Nat Turner leads a revolutionary slave rebellion that sent shockwaves to Southampton County, Virginia. Going from plantation to plantation, murdering the white slave owners and setting free the slaves, recruiting them to his army with each conquest on a holy mission of freedom. Was he the enraged murderer that the media portrayed him to be? Was he merely inspired by the dream of freedom, like so many slaves often were? Was he driven by divine purpose? What revelations did Nat see in the Holy Bible? Who was Nat Turner? Join us as we answer these questions and many more. Nat Turner, the slave, the prophet, the hero.
I'm proud of my heritage to Nat Turner, and I'm proud of the fact that I have inherited the legacy in which he passed down. And in doing so, that means that I have to accept everything that was about Nat Turner. A lot of black people do not like to accept the fact that they have a slave background or slave history. I embrace my slave history very well. And the principles that Nat fought for, liberty, honor, equality, those are the principles that I still hold to today. And so, yes, I'm very pleased the fact that Nat was in my lineage, and I'm very pleased to pass that on. I have grandchildren, and I try to instill into them. I use a statement that he used to use, a three little word was his motto, all here now. Nat wanted all people to be free, not just himself. He wanted all people in the black race to be free. He wanted them to be free here or wherever they live, not in some faraway land or back to Africa. And he wanted them to have it now. He tried to do it on August 22, 1831. He wasn't successful, but he did lay that seed. And today, I live here in Virginia, which is the home state of Nat Turner. I have all of my rights and all of my freedoms. Okay? I have all of them right here. And I have all of them now. My grandchildren will have those, and hopefully my great-grands and my great-great-grands and those who follow. So the legacy of Nat Turner, what he fought for, will go on for a lot of generations. First question is, Nat did not just seek to free his people through a violent rebellion. He has spent many of his early years freeing people, particularly freeing their mind and freeing their soul through his preaching of the Bible, through his embracement of the Christian religion, and he tirelessly sought to bring that to the slaves. He was well known for many years in the Southampton County area as a preacher of the gospel. So in that sense, he was already rebelling long before he struck his first blow, because he was giving people an outlet. He was bringing something to the slaves that they did not get every day, and particularly did not get from their masters. He educated himself. He could read and write. So he freed his mind to think beyond the boundaries of which was just his physical boundaries. As far as we know, he never left Southampton County, but his mind covered areas far beyond that. And then so he passed that on to other people as well. So he gave religious freedom to the slaves. Then he brought the freedom of education by freeing their minds and encouraging them to better themselves. And then as a last resort, when he was given directions that he said he received from God, he also used violence. The violence is the only one in which that we know about that's primarily passed through history, which we focus on. but it was only one small piece because it was only 3 days. When you measure 3 days against a lifetime of other actions, you see that Nat Turner didn't just bring freedom or try to bring freedom through physical, he also brought it through the mind and through all the other areas. He sought to free the whole slave, not just take away the chains.
There were other slave rebellions prior to Nat Turner in 1831. However, Nat Turner was the most successful open rebellion. You have rebellions like the Gabriel Prosser of Virginia. You have Denmark Vesey of South Carolina. Those rebellions were suppressed before it even happened, okay? Because you had house Negroes that would leak out the information, and the masters found out what was going on and they suppressed it. Nat Turner, on the other hand, he was successful. Now, what do I mean by successful? Successful as far as the casualties that he was able to bring forth on the slave masters and the other whites who owned slaves on the other plantations. He was unsuccessful as far as bringing freedom to the majority of his people, because as a result of the insurrection, a lot of them were put to death.
Nat started preaching the gospel as early as age 15, when he was under the ownership of his owner, which is named Samuel Turner. Samuel Turner was a Methodist, as was Benjamin Turner, Nat's original owner. And all 4 of his owners were Methodists. So he had an indoctrination into the Methodist religion, or the Methodist practices. He was also influenced by Quakers. Quakers were very strong in that area, and they also were opposed to slavery. Nat was known to preach in at least about 5 or 6 different locations. He was allowed to preach to slaves outside in the back of a church. He was not allowed to go inside the church, but he could preach to slaves outside. He traveled around to different places. In May of 1825, Nat was baptized. He and a white man named Brantley, Edward Brantley, baptized each other in front of a large crowd of both blacks and whites. Baptism unto Nat was his way of finally solidifying his closeness with God, or his relationship with God, and he felt that gave him the de facto directions or authority to bring salvation to the people in the area. He baptized many people in those various points around there down in Southampton County. Some of the locations was Cabin Pond, Pearson's Pond, Rivers Mill, Post Pond. There are names that still exist today down in Southampton County. So, like I say, he was administering to the black population to bring religion, to free their souls, so that they would know there was something other than just slavery. His first step into prophesizing is that he said that one day when he was, as a child, he was playing with children, and he started telling them a story about something that had happened. And the adults said that they knew that had happened before he was born. And one of the elders of the plantation, most likely it was on Benjamin Turner's plantation, said that anyone who could tell a story before they had happened, they had to have had an insight from God, and that made him a prophet. And as a young child, the word prophet had obviously had a significant meaning for Nat. Whether he had already read about prophets in the Bible, he may already have. And so by someone telling him that he was a prophet, he decided that was his direction that he would take. And so he spent his life trying to live up to the prophecy. In his confessions, he said he would fast, he would spend time away alone and commune with God, that he would go out and seek redemption for any past sins that he may have committed. He tried to live a very moral life. He didn't carry money on him. He never sought material gains. And he was known by everyone to be truthful, didn't tell lies. He didn't seek sexual favors, nor would he blaspheme against his neighbors.
Since a child, Nat Turner knew that he was ordained to be a prophet. He knew that this was his destiny. When you read the Confessions of Nat Turner, he always quoted the Bible. He used the Bible as fuel for insurrection. All right, and his idol, I should say, for lack of better words, was Jesus the Christ. Now, when you read in the New Testament, when the Pharisees and scribes turned on Christ and the Roman soldiers came along with Judas to take Christ, Christ didn't fight back. Christ willingly gave himself up for his people. The same thing with Nat Turner. Because when you read the Confessions, remember, Nat Turner ran away from one of his plantation owners. But he realized what he was destined for, and he returned back to the plantation where he ran away from. He didn't get caught. He willfully returned back because he knew his destiny. And what was his destiny? His destiny was to plan an insurrection and try to fight for freedom. He realized the impact that he would have on the minds of the other slaves, even the ones that didn't join the insurrection. All right, because that's what a leader does. A leader takes action. The slaves were tired of their condition. They were tired of their estate. Therefore, they had to rebel. All right, and Nat Turner was the man to lead that charge. Wow. So prior to the insurrection, did Nat Turner have like a history of being like, bad on a slave plantation or a rebellious slave?
No, it was actually well liked from all of that was given on him by all of his masters. He was given a lot of freedom to be a preacher. He started preaching the gospel as early as probably about 15 or 16 years old.
Wow, so Nat Turner started preaching the gospel at 15 years old.
Yeah, it was early. That's what the estimated time was 15. He during his ownership on the Samuel Turner, he preached around there to the slaves. Both Samuel and Benjamin went through a lot of effort to make sure that their slaves got religion.
Really?
Even schooling is believed that Benjamin allowed Nat to take classes with his children at a schoolhouse that he ran on the plantation.
Wow.
Now, there's no actual record of that, but Nat said that he never knew how he learned to read and write, but he had grown up knowing how to read and write, as well as to work numbers. So the logical conclusion is that he took lessons along with Benjamin Turner's children, most likely along with John Clark Turner, and John Clark Turner was known to be Nat Turner's close friend. So much so that during the insurrection, Nat deliberately avoided John Clark Turner's farm and didn't kill anyone there when he could have. And it was later on that was on the farm. John Clark Turner's farm is the farm that Fanny Turner was born on, who was my great-grandmother. That's the way the family, and was from Fanny, the line passed on down. So there's every indication that Nat was a well-liked, a well-thought-of person growing up. He ran away from Samuel Turner once. He said that he ran away after mistreatment from an overseer, but he came back after 30 days. And there's no indication that there was never any records that was ever found of like a wanted poster or anything else. So Samuel Turner trusted him to come back, or just assumed Nat would come back, because at that time he probably already was either married to Sherry, or because his mother was still living on the farm, they knew he would come back.
So he had a good relationship with the slave masters. He
had a good relationship with the slave masters. When he was under Tom Moore, Tom Moore allowed him not only to continue to preach, but also to hire himself out to work as a carpenter to other farms. And Joseph Travis continued up that same trend. Joseph Travis was a carriage maker by trade, more so than a farmer. So Nat was allowed to be the semi-overseer, I guess today you would call him a working boss, to the other slaves on the farm, to make sure that the farm work got done. I strongly believe that he believed that he was inspired by God. His statements that he gave were definitely statements that a person felt that they had been directed. It was not something that he just conjured up on his own to explain his actions later on. His life that he led showed that he obviously had full commitment to the words that he had received. If you take back to your time and try to imagine what it was like, a person who had to work every day for someone else, who had to be owned by someone else, who had no real freedoms of his own. And that here he was receiving the directions that he says come to him, that come only to him. And then he tries to balance his life to those directions as opposed to what his masters are telling him. I would say that he definitely had full belief that he was tapped and ordained by God, or the Spirit of God, to do the things that he did. Okay. And that was that his life was to be in their hands. Even when the insurrection came about, he knew that the most likely that he would fail and that death would come to him, but he was compelled by that belief that he was chosen. In his confessions, he said he was shown visions. He just didn't get voices or get words spoken to him. He was given visions. And in some of those visions, he saw people, black and white, of all colors and races, mixing without chains. He saw signs in the heavens stretched out across the sky that said that there was changes to come and there would be different, better times ahead. He saw signs in the woods and on the leaves and the trees. He even saw the signs of, say, blood on the coin. That's what a lot of people refer to. That was the impetus for his rebellion. But I think what that blood on the coin was actually that he was seeing given to him would be, say, the last sacrament, the blood of Christ, was being passed down to him, because he said in one of his statements was that the Spirit had told him to set loose the serpent and to slay his oppressors, and that it was time for him to lift up the yoke and carry on as Christ had carried. So Nat was through all the, and these happened before the insurrection had occurred, years before. So he was following what he felt was given divine inspiration, and he was being shown the way changes could be beyond just slavery, which made him stand out uniquely above slaves, because most slaves could only see the row of coin in front of them or the work that they were to do. He was seeing beyond himself and beyond even his own lifetime.
Nat Turner's role model would be Christ, because like I said, Nat Turner always quoted Christ. He always read the Bible. As we know, Christ had spiritual gifts ever since he was born. He was the Messiah. He was the Savior, right? Nat Turner understood this. Nat Turner's parents, his mother, told him that he was ordained for some great purpose, some great destiny. So what did that do? That had an influence on Nat Turner. That had an influence on his actions and so forth. He never hung out amongst the other slaves. He would separate himself. He would fast. He would pray often, right? And he would indulge himself in prophecies and scriptures. So Nat Turner understood that he was ordained from his youth to be a prophet of God, and not only a prophet of God, but to bring forth liberation to his people. He was a savior for our people in that time.
He was referring to the white oppressors, to the slave owners, and he said that he would rise up and slay them with their own weapons. And in doing so, that he would take on the yoke that Christ had borne to bring the freedom to man. So Nat was feeling that his actions was, now he was taking the position when Christ came to the world, was to take away the sins of man and to bring redemption to man. So Nat felt that he was also following in that same line, that he was the next person chosen to do that. In his, again, referring back to his confessions, Nat said that there was one particular passage in the Bible that he always carried with him. That was from the book of Matthew, was "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you." He said he developed his life around that. When he would do his prayers, he would spend his time in fasting and in study. He always referred back to that particular passage, "Seek ye the kingdom of heaven, and all things shall be added unto you." So those, and he also quoted other biblical structures, like for instance when he had escaped from Tom Moore, and he stayed away for 30 days, but then he came back of his own accord and gave himself back to his master. And when the slaves asked him why did he come back when he was already free, he said that he quoted that the person who does not do his master's will, or know his master's will and do it, shall be flogged with many stripes. So again, he was using the Bible to justify some of his actions. So I'm very sure that throughout his life, whatever he did, he used the passages and the learnings that he had picked up in the Bible as a means of explaining his behavior. Nat's ultimate goal of the insurrection was to get to Jerusalem. There was an armory of arms there.
Jerusalem as
the town.
Okay.
Okay. In that town, there was an army, like in most all other towns, that the white militias maintained their weapons. Rifles, powder, cannons. And Nat, as he moved through the countryside with building his army, his final goal was to get to Jerusalem, seize that armory, and then fortify the city and build it up with a large army of slaves. From that, he would grow an even bigger army and then eventually force the white government to agree to end in slavery. In Jerusalem, I think he had that as maybe even becoming, say, the capital of the new Virginia without slavery, just as Jerusalem is the central capital of the Judeo-Christian religion. So from that, Jerusalem had a very, very significant impact to Nat Turner. But the accident of history, or say the accident of coincidence, Jerusalem was not that significant in the overall scheme of things. And the reason the name was changed from Jerusalem to Cortland, according to their history, was that's where the central courthouse was, the circuit court. And so as to identify that there was the court, the court seat was in the county, they changed the name to Cortland.
Well, as a leader of the people, you got to go above and beyond. You got to separate yourself. You got to do things that the norm, outside of the norm, I should say. None of the other slaves were praying and fasting often. None of the other slaves were separating themselves and studying the prophecies and the scriptures and so forth. Nat Turner understood this. He understood his mission. Because remember, it was implanted in him since he was a little kid, from his mother and his grandmother. They told him that he was ordained to be a prophet from his youth. So that always resonated and stayed in the mind of Nat Turner. So what did he do? He started doing things that a prophet does. When you read the scriptures, that's what the prophets did. They didn't entertain things in the world, right? And they were always praying and fasting.